Good afternoon. My name is Lise Elliott, and I want to welcome you to our 9th annual Rosalind Franklin University Women in Science and Healthcare Symposium, or WISH. I'm co-chair of the WISH committee, and I just want to shout out to my wonderful co-chairs, Christine Burgess and Susie Calkins, along with our just fantastic team that has worked tirelessly to organize this over the better part of the last year. We just could not do it without them. They're here in the audience or on Zoom, so please shout out your thanks when you see them. And we'd also like to welcome and thank President and CEO Dr. Wendy Rowe, who has been extremely supportive with the administration of WISH and our mission, and is kind enough to say a few opening words. I will then come back and introduce today's speaker.
Thank you so much, Lise. And I want to thank the people that worked so hard on putting this together, because I can't believe it's the 9th annual, and it was a brainchild of Lise, and she's just made it happen every single year. So kudos to you, Lise. And I think I need a new picture because my hair grew during COVID and I never cut it. So, so thank you again. We're all interested in learning how deeply ingrained gender roles and norms limit women's potential in healthcare and in our society. We have some progress. We've made progress on gender equity, but there's still much to do to ensure an equitable future for women and girls. I'm looking at Chris, it's your little baby. Restrictive gender roles impact socioeconomic status, which is a huge factor in the quality of life for women, for children, and for their families. We don't have enough women in top roles. I'm proud to say that I'm the first woman president at Rosalind Franklin University's history in over 100 years. But when I told my granddaughter that, she said, "What?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm the first woman president." She said, "Nana, really? Like, really?" Like, it was inconceivable to her that there wouldn't be another woman. So it really showed me how it is inconceivable in some ways, right? So out of the mouths of babes. So she goes around telling everybody that she meets. When I go into the classroom, she tells the teacher, "Oh yeah, she's the first woman." That they go, "Yeah." So that's nice. 68% of my leadership team is women. When I was the dean, I was the only woman dean out of 4 deans. And now out of our 6 deans, 5 of them are women. And 1 of them is men, sorry, back there. And he's here. So he wants to learn, he's got those 5 women deans. But, people say, "Well, did you do that on purpose to just pick women deans?" And no, women deans who applied for the position, right, Archie, were attracted because there was a woman president. And so they felt like they could be supportive. So it makes a difference to have a woman in that top role because other women feel like they will be supportive. So just remember that. 41% of our associate deans in the university are women, and 48% of our vice presidents. So, we've done a good job, and I really think it's important that top position. But even women in leadership can be marginalized because of their gender. The philanthropist Melinda French Gates, who we all know, recently talked in an interview about her struggle to have women experience and perspectives, including her own, taken seriously. She said, and I quote, "We have to invest in women and girls because we send young people out into society that wasn't built for them." Fields like medicine, pharmacy, and some of the fields that we're involved in are important to our social fabric. Those fields need our perspectives as women. Women can shape healthcare policy and practice. They can improve patient outcomes and well-being. They can reset gender-based expectation for performance and for success. Our namesake, Dr. Rosalind Franklin, could speak to that. She disregarded gender roles and pushed past the sexism that she experienced. Her resilience led to a breakthrough in our understanding of genetics and is regarded as probably one of the most meaningful discoveries of the 20th century. So we're lucky as a university to have our namesake be a woman. We are honored to carry on her name and her legacy. Our university is committed to achieving health and gender equity and an increasing representation of women in STEM, in healthcare, and in academic leadership. So thank you so much for coming today. This is an important conversation. I'm so blessed to have Elise leading this charge for so many years. And thanks again for coming.
So thank you so much, Dr. Rowan. We are really deeply appreciative of the support that the university has given to this symposium. The mission of WISH is to honor Rosalind Franklin by shining a light on both the accomplishments and hurdles for women and gender diversity in science and healthcare. Each year, the WISH committee chooses a theme related to this mission. Our theme this year is Gender Roles Under the Microscope. I think we've seen it in our title. Sorry, I'm messing up the flow, which aims to address how our deeply ingrained understanding of masculinity and femininity intersect with our daily work as clinicians and scientists, both aiding and interfering with this work, helping and simultaneously hurting patients, students, colleagues, co-workers, and institutional missions. This theme allows us a deep dive into the issues that have arisen throughout the 9 years of this series, especially our 2016 inaugural event on gender bias in STEM and healthcare. Today's discussion will certainly touch on bias and discrimination, but aims to get at one root cause of it in the powerful implicit roles that we learn early in life and their impact on our personal and professional endeavors throughout life. Gender roles were also integral to our 2017 symposium, which addressed gender segregation in healthcare professions. That's this inescapable fact that men and women are shuttled into different segments of the industry, whether by professional credentials, disciplinary focus, or hierarchical position, and the impact of this segregation on patients and practitioners alike. In 2020, we honored Dr. Rosalind Franklin's centennial birthday by focusing on the herstory of Dr. Franklin and other women scientists whose work has been tragically overlooked because they did not fit into prevailing gender norms. In 2021, we extended this focus to the intersectionality between sexism, racism, and other forms of discrimination affecting scientists and clinicians. In 2022, we responded to the Supreme Court Dobbs decision with a focus on the legal and medical status of women's bodies as both biological and socially gendered beings. And even last year's powerful series on climate change and women's health taught us how the different roles of men and women, much more than biological sex, lead to different burdens when it comes to global heating, natural disasters, and who is driving the movement to heal our planet. This and all of our recent symposia and seminars are available on our RFU WISH YouTube channel, which we invite you to check out after today's event. We really have quite a series we're quite proud of, and a fantastic team that has edited these and posted them. So today we're going to widen our focus on these deeply seated gender roles and their impact on science and health care. And we are very fortunate to have as our speaker, Dr. Amy Diehl, to help us do so. Before I introduce Dr. Diehl formally, I do need to announce that today's session has been qualified for 2 credits of continuing education for today's clinician participants. The fine print on the slide lists the learning objectives and notes that none of today's speakers or organizers have conflicts of interest with the material that we're presenting. So, I now have the great pleasure of introducing today's keynote, Amy Diehl, who will launch our investigation of gender roles and their impact on science and healthcare professions. Dr. Diehl is a computer scientist, IT leader, and gender equity researcher who's published many scholarly and trade articles, along with her recent book, Gender Walls: Shattering the 6 Gender Barriers Still Holding Women Back at Work, co-authored with Leanne Dubinsky. And I should add that we will hold a drawing at the end of the panel for 2 students to win copies of Dr. Diehl's book, and then we'll have a signing for anyone who wishes to purchase the book from 5 to 5:30 afterwards. So back to my introduction. Dr. Diehl received a BS in computer science from Shippensburg University in Pennsylvania, an MBA from Frostburg State University, and a PhD in administration and leadership from the Indiana University of Pennsylvania. Through all of this, she has been employed in information technology, working up from network specialist to associate vice president and chief IT officer at Shippensburg University, and then further promoted to her present position as chief information officer at Wilson College in Pennsylvania in 2021. Somehow, in addition to this day job, Dr. Diehl managed to find the time to write Glass Walls, as well as a number of high-impact articles and book chapters on women's leadership. These include the development of a multi-industry scale of gender bias for women leaders, a study on the impact of gender essentialism on women leaders, and a chapter that explores gender bias affecting women in medicine. She's also published many popular articles in journals such as the Harvard Business Review and Ms. Magazine on topics ranging from how ageism affects women at all ages, gender bias in female-dominated workplaces, and the, quote, untitling or uncredentialing of professional women that devalues their training and accomplishments. So it's a sobering set of topics, but all very important to address head-on. And so I'm very proud to turn it over to Dr. Diehl to present her keynote, Glass Walls, Shattering Gender Barriers in Science and Healthcare. Welcome, Dr. Diehl.
Thank you, Lise, for that kind introduction. I'm so glad to be with you here today. I've had such a warm welcome all day, and I'm just so honored to be here and to be giving you this keynote. So, sorry about that. Try to get my notes set up here. Okay. So I want to give you, I'll give you a little bit of background about myself. Beyond what Lise told you in the introduction. So I did study computer science, and when I was in college, I was one of only 1 or 2 women in my classes, but I did really well. I got all A's. I turned in my work. I earned the grade. And I thought as much of this world was a meritocracy. I didn't know the word meritocracy back then, but I thought it was, that women had the same opportunities as men. And I certainly felt that was the case during my educational career. When I got into the workplace, though, then some strange things started to happen. And I was then working in information technology, which, as you know, is male dominated. And I ran into a few strange problems. Like one thing I was doing was I had male leaders around me and I would watch them. I would try to learn from them. I wanted to learn how to lead. And so I tried to emulate them. But I found that whenever I acted the way that they acted, like when I tried to be authoritative, for example, I lost respect, whereas they gained respect when they were authoritative. I also found out that another thing that was interesting was that there was at one of my early jobs, there was a female administrative assistant, and she just was not very nice to me. And I didn't understand why. Like I would go to her just, to ask for help to do my job, and she would put up roadblocks. And I didn't understand why. And I'll get into why a little bit later. Another thing that happened was I was kind of subtly dissuaded from joining the women's consortium in my higher ed institution by the male leaders around me. It's like, you don't, women's rights, like you don't need that. But that was the sense I got, And it was only later when I started studying for my PhD, and I started studying gender barriers, because I started to realize I really want to look into this. I was taking all this stuff personally for a long time. When I started my PhD program, I took that opportunity to start studying gender barriers that were happening towards other women. And I found out I wasn't alone. I wasn't at fault. It wasn't personal to me. It was about these more systemic gender barriers that exist in our workplaces, and unfortunately still exist today. So that's what I'm going to talk about in today's presentation. This book, Glass Walls, is a culmination of the research that Dr. Leanne Dubinsky and I have done. We're also going to talk about the glass walls, and then I'm going to leave you with some strategies that we can all use to shatter the walls. And as a note, as I go through this presentation, course, I'm referring to the book. I'm also going to refer to some of the popular press articles that we've written, and these slides can be made available to you, which have the links to the various articles. Everything is also linked on my website, amy-diehl.com. So if you want to go there to find any of my work, you can do that. Okay. What am I doing here? All right, is everybody aware of who this is? Dr. Shattering Carrico, right? I would think so in your field that you all know who this is. So I bring up her story because we tell her story in Glass Walls because, you know, she was a researcher. She researched messenger RNA, mRNA for decades, right? But while she was doing this, her efforts were repeatedly dismissed and devalued by her employer, which happened to be the University of Pennsylvania at the time. So she, at a certain point, she needed to continue to have like funding, you know, to continue her research. And when she could not obtain sufficient funding, her university demoted her out of her tenure track position. And I'm sure you all know that when most faculty are demoted out of a tenure track role or told that they're not going to get tenure, they leave. Well, she decided to stay because she felt that she really wanted to do this research and she felt it was really going to be valuable. During that time, after being demoted in 2012, she published a groundbreaking study on mRNA therapy. And then she left a year later at the university and she took a senior VP role with BioNTech. So we all know what happened. Pandemic hits. Remember March 2020, right? We all knew that one of the solutions would be a vaccine. And I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, it was like, as soon as we could think of a vaccine, 3 years, 5 years, maybe even longer, right, through traditional methods. But here was her research, and here that she had the foresight to be working on years and years earlier, that allowed the development of the initial vaccines to happen very quickly. What was interesting was that when the University of Pennsylvania released its first promo video about the COVID vaccine, they focused on her. She had a male partner. The promo video focused on the partner and just only mentioned her like in passing. So here she had brought forth a technology that really, really helped us get a step forward through this pandemic quickly, but she was, again, being more so devalued. And the one thing I think about her though, is that if she, let's think about if she had left the University of Pennsylvania, right, and given up on her research, where would we be today in fighting this pandemic? Right. And then I also think about what if they had better supported her? Where would we be today? Like maybe we'd be even further ahead than where we are, right? And as most of you know, like she went on to win the Nobel Prize and well deserved. Finally, she's got the recognition that has been her due. But the one thing when I bring up this story, I bring up to you to remember that Dr. Carrico is an exception. Okay. We never hear about the lost potential of women who are stuck beneath their capabilities in like lower or mid-level roles, or who are just forced out of toxic workplaces. So the harms, like we think about the harms to workplace gender bias. It's not just that one woman is like pushed out of her role, which is as bad as that is, but it's harmful to our whole society when woman after woman after woman after woman cannot fulfill their potential. Half of society, right? It's really limiting society's ability to solve our most pressing problems. Your organizations, you're working on innovation, healthcare innovation, you're working in the medical field, you're solving problems, that really obviously impacting women's health, people's health, and aiding our life expectancies. But when we don't have half of our society contributing to solving these problems, it really limits our ability to diagnose and cure disease. Especially the diseases that affect women. It also limits the ability to make healthcare affordable, right, and accessible to everyone, and especially underrepresented groups. And then it literally it's limiting our overall lifespans. If you think about if you're imagining the lost potential that we have because of this problem. Okay, so I'll give you a couple stats for academic medicine. Like almost every other industry in academic medicine, women are less likely to hold the higher ranks and leadership positions than men. And they're also more likely to leave their profession. And I'm just, by the way, just shout out, I'm just like in awe of what you all have been able to do with women's leadership here at Rosalind Franklin. Let's just, really a shout out to your work, and it's very grateful for it. But if you look at academic medicine overall, you do see that there's a study of 300,000 physicians over 5 years. The male physicians left at the rate of 32%, the female physicians a higher rate of 38%. So women were 25% more likely to leave over that time frame, and this was regardless of their region, career stage, specialty, or the ranking of their medical school. Okay, so what's going on? The organizations have adopted policies prohibiting overt forms of sex discrimination. Impediments to women's advancement are still built into ordinary institutional functioning. Some are subtle and unconscious, some are still overt and deliberate. But this overall concept of gender bias, it involves barriers which arise from cultural beliefs about gender, as well as workplace structures, practices and patterns of interaction that favor men. So my co-author and I, Dr. Dubinsky, we really wanted to understand what was happening with women in the workplace. And so we, along with 2 other researchers, Dr. David Wong and Dr. Amber Stevenson, has developed a scale to measure women's experience of bias. This was called the Gender Bias Scale for Women Leaders. It was out of that scale development that we surfaced these 6 primary factors. So these are not just 6 factors that I pulled out of my head. They're not just 6 factors that, like, my 6 favorite ones, or even the 6 ones that are most often talked about. These were derived in a very scientific way in doing the scale development. So these are male. So the 6 factors, or the 6 glass walls, are male privilege, which dominates the workplace environment. Women may gain entry into the environment, but there are disproportionate constraints on their choices and behavior. There's often insufficient support given to women, as well as a devaluation of their contributions. And then hostility is used to keep women in line in their supposed place. And then finally, at the bottom there, you see acquiescence. This is what happens when women acquiesce. They basically give in, right, to their supposed place in the male-dominated culture. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the latest research, which was in our book, Class Walls. What Dr. Dubinsky and I did was we took these 6 barriers and we did more qualitative research, because we wanted to know what were the sub factors, what was making up these six core barriers. And so that's what's written in our book. And the other thing I'll say about this book is that we wrote the book that we wish we had when we were starting out in the workplace. I wish I had read this when I was coming out of college and getting ready to take my first job. And not to demoralize me about how terrible and unequal the world was, but just to prepare me. I can't say that my career experience has been all bad. There's been lots of positive experiences, but there have been these pockets of negative experience and bias that I've experienced. And I would have liked to have been better prepared. So I, first of all, didn't take it personally, and then secondly, knew how to address it more quickly, instead of having to, in my experience, it was like trial and error, to figure out how to address it. Okay, so I'm going to go through these 6 barriers, and I'm going to give you a few examples of each one. First one is male privilege. So male privilege environment assumes that men are the leaders, and that men control the resources and set the standards for the culture. Women do gain entry into the culture, but typically in ways that are not threatening to the men's privilege. So in this type of environment, there's a male culture with the assumption that men are in charge. Men are gatekeepers. They control which women have access to positions and leadership, and the bounds of their leadership and their authority. So an example occurred to one of the physicians in my research. She applied for a minor leadership role, which nobody else was interested in. After she applied, 2 other men with more important leadership roles were made to apply for this role that she wanted. And of course, her quote was, "It was given to one of the men in the good old boys club." So that's an example of male gatekeeping, keeping her out of a role that she could have easily done. I think there's some physicians in the room. If you're a woman physician, have any of you ever been mistaken to be like a nurse or another female-dominated role? Yeah. If you have experienced that, that's something called role incredulity. And As we go through this presentation and in the book, one of the things you'll notice is that we talk about is, as Leanne and I were doing the research, there were certain concepts, certain aspects of gender bias that just didn't have any names to them or labels. And this was one of them. So we took on the effort of like naming things. It's really important that things, the aspects of the bias have a name, have a label, so you have a way of talking about it, have a way of making it real, and then you have a way of figuring out what are solutions or what are ways to eliminate it. So this was one. This didn't have a name, and we coined this term role incredulity. So in a male-privileged environment, outsiders may mistake women serving as leaders or in other traditional male roles for women for traditional female roles. So they may, for example, mistake somebody who's a professor for being a student or being an admin assistant, or somebody who's a physician for being a nurse. And there's nothing, just to be clear, like there's nothing wrong with any of these roles. It's the assumption that one gender does any of the particular roles, whether it's the nurse or the doctor or whatever. And, you know, the key problem here for women is when you're just assuming that they are not in charge, the authority granted to them by their position is diminished, right? And their words lose some of their importance. Okay. All right. Another aspect of male privilege is the concept of the glass cliff. Now, I hope you all know where this picture is, right? Right. The Willis Tower. When I was growing up, I thought of it as a Sears Tower. I still think of it as a Sears Tower. Yeah. So I've done this. This isn't me, but I've done this. I've been out on this ledge. It's 103 floors up, looking down on the city below, and it's a little bit freaky. But this concept of a glass cliff, it occurs when a woman is placed into a risky top position when the organization is in a crisis or in a state of decline. And sometimes a position can turn into a glass cliff, like where maybe the organization wasn't in dire straits at the person's hiring, but they are put in a risky role of like being the savior and fixing everything. And so it's a perilous situation in which the woman will be blamed or let go if she doesn't perform the miraculous. A good present day example. There's a couple of present day examples. These are outside of healthcare, but Linda Yaccarino. Do anybody know who she is? She's the CEO of, I call it Twitter, but the company now known as X. You know, she's certainly on a glass cliff because their founder, Elon Musk, is still there and still very much exerting, his tentacles into that company. Another one is the current CEO of Boeing Commercial Airplanes, is a woman named Stephanie Pope. And if you know anything about Boeing, right, they've been going through recent crisis related to the safety of their airplanes. Okay, so now we're going to go to number 2, disproportionate constraints. So women may be constrained to act in certain ways, subordinate to men, and expected to play supportive roles to male power. So women's voices are often muted, and their communication style is often constrained. This is one of the more subtle barriers. They may find that being too directive breaks leader norms, while being too directive breaks female norms, while being too tentative breaks leader norms. Okay, let's say that right. That's the problem. This is one of the problems I was running into as a young IT leader. Like I knew I had to be decisive and authoritative, but I couldn't be tentative. But it was very hard to show my competence, right, as a woman. Women of color maybe have to be especially careful with walking communication tightrope. We found in our research that women of color expressed that they had to really walk a fine line between being seen as assertive and aggressive. Beyond communication styles, women's voices are often muted in other ways, and there are some new terms that correlate to this phenomenon. So I'm curious if you've heard of any of these. He-peat. Has anybody heard of he-peat? Okay. He-peat is when a woman suggests an idea and it's ignored, but then a man says the same thing and everyone loves it. I'm sure you've seen it, right? So now you can say, he just he-peated me, or he just he-peated her, right? The next one, broappropriate. So this one's a little bit more intentional. This is when a man a man actively repeats a woman's idea and actively takes credit for it. So he broappropriates it. Okay, next one, manterrupt. That is what it sounds like. It's when a man unnecessarily interrupts a woman. And then mansplain. I'm sure you've all heard of mansplain. That's now in the dictionary. And It's when a man interrupts a woman to explain to her something that she actually knows more about than he does. So there are these new terms that we didn't coin these, but they are new terms that you can use to help highlight some of the ways that women's communication is being constrained. Okay. Emotional labor. This one I think is very critical in your all's field. So emotional labor describes managing and producing feelings. So one example is like a flight attendant whose job it is to be excessively nice to passengers, right? Teaching and childcare are other professions where emotional labor is an expectation of the job. And so those are all female-dominated jobs, right? But we found in our research that women are disproportionately expected to perform emotional labor even when it's not an official part of their job duties. They may be expected to act as cheerleaders towards the men in the workplace, have a constant smile. If you've ever been asked to smile on demand, you know what I mean. Be caring and nurturing, and then buffer men's emotions. And then, we know for female physicians, it's well documented that they spend more time with their patients, right? And more time listening to their concerns and talking to them. So the problem isn't that the female physicians are providing the emotional support. It's a very important part of patient care. But the issue is that it's not officially recognized or rewarded. And it works against them in terms of reducing the amount of billable visits that they can attend to. Okay, numbers. Oh, before we get to number 3, scrutiny. Women are often scrutinized. They have their performance is scrutinized where they have to go above and beyond that of the men. If you want an example of that, just look at the scrutiny over Vice President Harris in her race for president against former President Trump. They're also their hair, their appearance is scrutinized. Again, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, Vice President Harris. You'll see this. These women, where there's complete articles, written about them. Even us who are aren't out on the national stage, like running for president, this happens to us too. Maybe there's not articles written about it, but we are scrutinized in ways in the conversations, in hiring committees and, ways that we often aren't in the room to hear. Okay, number 3 is insufficient support. Women may lack access to social structures and networks that would support their advancement. They lack mentors and sponsors. So a mentor is someone who can help them develop professionally, whereas a sponsor is someone who can advocate for their advancement. These points are well known. They may also face exclusion from informal networks, unofficial social events, and sometimes even formal professional events, all of which are places where work relationships are built and relationships are formed. And so even when women are invited to some of these unofficial events, like, for example, going to the bar after work or going golfing on a weekend, they may not have interest or they may not have time to do so, especially if they've got caretaking responsibilities. Okay, number 4, devaluation. Devaluation is attempts to make women seem less important and detract from their authority. So women's contributions may be devalued if they are acknowledged at all. It may be assumed that they'll handle administrative work, including office housework. Have anybody heard of this term, office housework? I'm sure some of you have. Examples are things like taking notes in a meeting, serving on committees, organizing the office party, cleaning the office refrigerator or microwave, or even just helping a colleague to improve a presentation or a project. Other types of academic office housework or service work, like serving on committees and doing like diversity work, right? These activities are all important. Like, they're all really important and helpful to keep everything running smoothly in an organization. But again, they're rarely recognized or rewarded. And women are also under social pressure to volunteer for office housework, and they may experience backlash if they say no. Okay, credibility deficit. If you've ever been asked, are you sure that's right after you've made a statement? Or if you've had someone else turn to the man next to you and say, is she correct? That's credibility deficit. And this is another word that we coined. This occurs when women's words or accounts of events are discredited or flat out disbelieved. Women of color may be especially, again, impacted by this barrier. One woman in our research said She said, in addition to what seem to be lower expectations of competency for women of color, I am often asked about my age in roundabout ways. So it's like, how long have you worked in your current or previous positions? She says, I'm often pressed to provide a synopsis of my resume to establish credibility. So whereas her male counterpart can probably just go into the meeting or whatever situation, just start talking, she has to back up and say, okay, I've done X, Y, and Z. I've got these degrees. This is why I'm credible on this topic. So it's, again, it's extra time, extra effort that's put on women to help us to appear to be the equals that we are. Diminishment is another type of devaluation. These are behaviors such as put downs or pet names, disparagement, belittling, or just assuming that a woman's opportunities are the result of her gender only, like she's a DEI hire or an affirmative action hire. This one we talked about quite a bit today. These are two other terms that we've coined. So for any of you in this audience that have a title, like a doctor title, like raise your hand if you've ever been addressed by your first name in a professional setting where doctor titles are normally used. Yeah, see all these hands go up. Like I have too, right? And I have a PhD. But what I found is that like I had at my former institution, I had a male boss, and that people would often refer to us as, this wasn't his name, but it would be often be like Dr. Smith and Amy. And I'm like, if you're going to call him Dr. Smith, you can call me Dr. Diehl, right? Or you can call him by his first name and me by my first name. Like, just keep it equal, depending on the situation. But what we find is that this happens all the time for women with professional degrees, where their titles are dropped or their credentials are dropped in situations where they're used for their male counterparts. Okay, devaluation also happens in women's pay. As you can see, women of all races and ethnicities earn less than white men. Women of all ages earn less than men. And then salaries are unequal even when you compare them by position. So what I did here was I looked at the different specialties within the field of medicine. And what you can see is there's an average gender pay gap of 26% for women physicians, which is huge. But as you can see, there's some specialties where even where there are more women in the specialty, the men still earn more. And you also find this outside of medicine in cases of like teachers, for example, or nurses inside of medicine, where even though the field is overwhelmingly female dominated, the men who are in those positions are making more money. And so that's what this is showing you. We had some, so one of the issues that comes up with or the excuses for paying women less is what we call the family excuse. And it's when women are told, your money is like, you don't need the money, it's just for fun. So you don't need the raise. Like this guy over here, he needs a raise because he's the breadwinner, he's got a family. Your money is just like secondary. It's seen as secondary, again, like pin money, just for fun. Like we all just come to work for fun every day. Like I don't know. I don't know about you, but I do appreciate my paycheck. Okay. Hostility. Number 5. So hostility is active. It's much more active resistance to women's presence and its attempt, again, to keep them in their place. This includes things like discrimination. Is also like being denied opportunities for challenging assignments, job-related travel, promotions. They may face harassment, including sexual harassment. They may also face retaliation. When a woman reports harassment or participates in an investigation legally, there can be no consequences. But unfortunately, we know that just because something is written into law doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And retaliation happens all the time. So retaliation can take the form of being fired, transferred, demoted, disciplined, isolated, blacklisted, intimidated, excluded, becoming the target of rumors. All of these are illegal and considered retaliation when a woman has filed a complaint. Hostility includes workplace harassment, verbal abuse, bullying, sabotage, and like I said, sexual harassment. I want to focus on just one of these types for the purpose of this talk. So some of the physicians in our survey noted that they were sabotaged. And so this is the type of harassment that one may not even know is happening because it's kind of happening like behind your back, right? One of the physicians said, it's highly possible I've been sabotaged at work. And she said, highly possible that my gender has impacted the opportunities that I've been offered. She said, the hard part is that you don't know what you don't know. So those things could very well be happening, but I'm oblivious, right? Okay, we'll get back to my story about the female, the administrative assistant that I was working with. This stems from female hostility. So not all harassment comes from men. In order to protect themselves, women may reinforce sexist norms against other women. This is known as two types: queen bee behavior, which occurs when women at the top fail to help other women or actively prevent their promotion. And it's usually driven by insecurity, when women are worried that their position may be actively taken away at any moment. So made to second guess themselves, they try to keep other women down. The other type of female hostility is what we call mean girls behavior. And note that I'm calling these behaviors, like I don't like to label people as queen bees or mean girls, but these are types of a behavior, a definite label for behavior. Mean girls is hostility from peer and lower level women. So this would be the example of that I was facing. I was like a network manager or whatever, and there was the administrative assistant that was, actively trying to block my ability to do my job. So this can be like, again, like admin assistants towards directors or female professors, or like nurses towards physicians. There's a very interesting paper by doctors Teresa Cardador, Patrick Hill, and Arga Gonzalez. They talk about something called status leveling burden. It's the pressure of women in lower level occupational roles that they put on the women in the upper level roles in male dominated fields. They put on this pressure to be their equal. Like they want to feel that everyone in the organization is like, they want to basically bring these women in the higher level roles down, like so that they're all at the same. They want to feel that they're the same equality as women. But so again, one of the examples here is this nurses towards female doctors. When the nurses treat the male doctors one way, very positively, respond to their requests, and then put up roadblocks for the female physicians. So in the paper, what they described, though, was the extra efforts that the female doctors would go to in order to gain cooperation from the nurses. One example was baking cookies. Okay, so the female physicians, even the residents, would take time to bake cookies or bring donuts to remain in the nurses' good graces. And one of the physicians remarked, men never do that. So, like I'm not in the medical field, but I know that when you're a physician, when you're a resident, like you're working long hours. And, I think that you should be afforded the time to go home and rest, and not feel that you have to like bake cookies in order to, make your work life a little bit better. But again, these concepts, they stem from gender stereotypes about what is suitable for women, and just a reminder that we've all been socialized into the same system. So the problem is not the individual women, but it's the combination of organizational pressures and stereotypes. Okay, last but not least, acquiescence. When the barriers are so prevalent, women may internalize them and adapt to the limitations. They may self-silence. So if they do experience sexism or any other kind of workplace sexism or hostility, they may self-silence in order to maintain loyalty to their male leaders, like to protect themselves. And it's a way to maintain favor with their male colleagues and superiors. And then may also limit their aspirations. So this sounds like it's an individual women's choice. Like when you think about if a woman says like, okay, I'm not going to go for that leadership position because what's better for me is X. Well, what we found in our research is that there's two reasons that women limit their aspirations. One is that they believe that they're not capable of advancement. So they've internalized like the misogyny, right? They've internalized this idea that they're not capable of moving up. Or some women really truly believe that they are capable, but they just don't want the hassle. They don't want the pressures of professional advancement that men don't face. And so they limit their aspirations. And this one, again, it's not just like because they made this choice in a vacuum or something. It's a result of all the other barriers, everything else that they've experienced. And it's a very rational choice. We found that sometimes women would even advocate against themselves when they were offered a promotion. There was a university president that I spoke to, and she explained her career path. When she was a professor, she had served as like in an ombudsman role. So she had this like administrative role. Her president of her university came to her and said, hey, like, Jackie, I would like you to be the interim provost. This professor said, no, like, I can't do that. That's too big. You should ask someone else. Like, that's not for me. And it actually took this female president's encouragement, as well as the encouragement of this woman's husband, for her to take that interim provost role. Now, this woman went on to serve as a university president, not just one, but two institutions. And I just think about how different her career trajectory would have been if she didn't accept, if she didn't have that extra encouragement to accept that first jump into, administration. Okay. Keep this moving. So the theme for today's symposium is gender roles under the microscope. So we've looked under the microscope, and this is what we see. At the root of all these barriers are outdated gender roles, that men belong at work and in public spaces, and that women belong in private spheres at home or in low-wage work, supporting men's ability to be out in the upper level top roles. So I want to return to Dr. Carrico. She had this quote. I also thank the people who tried to make my life miserable because they made me work harder. This really is the epitome of how women have to navigate workplaces that weren't built for them, right? Too often our working lives are made miserable, and that makes us, it only makes us have to work harder, to achieve what we want to achieve. But not only that, we also have to be gracious about it, right? So if you notice, she's like, I'm thanking these people. Well, it's just a very, very good explanation for the outcome of workplace gender bias. Before we move to solutions, I'll just point you to my co-author's latest research. We have a study that we did on identity factors that contribute to women's experiences. We found that virtually any characteristic can be leveraged against a woman in a discriminatory fashion, either in an overt or subtle way. And what we also found was that these surface level critiques, they really function as a red herring, right? They distract from the inherent gender bias driving the encounter. There's a couple ways we've dubbed this type of bias. One is never quite right. Another way we've dubbed it is we want what you aren't discrimination. So whatever you are, that's not what we want. Our research revealed these 30 different characteristics or qualities of women's identity that emerge as points of criticism. And as you notice, like, absolutely none of these are talking about her skills, her experience, her ability to do the job. And even ones that like might seem related, like education, that wasn't like whether she had the degrees or not, but like the degree wasn't from the right school, like it was just excuses. Vice President Harris we quote her in the book, and one of the quotes she had was that when she was moving up through her like political career, she was always told, it's not your time. Like a Black woman's never done that. So that's like hitting on two of these factors, the age and the race, right? By saying you can't do that. She fortunately ignored that advice, and is to the point that she's at today. Or 10 till? Okay. All right. So I want to get to solutions. I'll stop talking about Vice President Harris. Let's do some solutions, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. Okay. So I have solutions on 3 levels: leaders, allies, and women themselves. It really takes all of us working together. And you might be in a leader position one day or at one meeting, and the next meeting you're in an ally role. So you can pay attention to all of these ideas. First one is to replace your workplace competition with collaboration, enabling everyone to succeed. I'll just go through these quickly. They're in the book, and you can read more about them there. They're also in, this slide also comes from the Harvard Research Review article, Research How Bias Against Women Persists in Female-Dominated Workplaces. Measure success by goals instead of time in the office or time in get away from presenteeism. Equitable rewards. It may seem that like meritocratic in quotes, reward systems like billable hours may seem equitable, but they paradoxically increase gender inequality. So implement reward structures that recognize all types of work, including the office housework and all types of work that contribute to your organization's success. Remote and flexible work, the pandemic has shown, how much work can actually be done remotely and flexibly that only benefits women. Make sure you have transparency. Make sure that when you're making decisions, you're not making decisions out on the golf course. You don't even need to talk about work when you're on the golf course or at the bar, right? If you're in a situation where your colleagues are like, let's talk about work, and you're in this situation, you can just redirect that back, like, hey, let's talk about this on Monday when we can invite this person, this person, this person, make sure we're all in the room. And then eliminating cultures of overwork. And I know medicine has some work to do in this area. And I'm sure you can all speak to that better than I can. Okay, allies. Go to allies quickly. Call out bias when you see it. That may seem but it's one of the things, like, you're all here today. So if you recognize it, like, learning to recognize it is so important. And when you see it, if you're the ally, it's so much easier for you to say something than it is for the person that's experiencing it, in terms of the just the amount of backlash you might get from speaking up. Advocate for women in hiring promotion. Like, if you're on the search committee or a position is open, advocate for specific women, encourage women in your network to apply. Watch out for that identity-based criticism that we just talked about. And this is one that I really like. Flip it to test it. Have any of you heard of this approach? Okay. Kristen Pressner, she's a sociologist, Dr. Kristen Pressner. She came up with this approach. She has a TED Talk. It's called Flip It to Test It. So if you hear of a criticism of a woman, flip it and use a man's name and see if that criticism still sounds legit. Like, would you say Jose is too bossy? You might say Mary is too bossy. I don't know, right? Like, flip it. Or Mary might get pregnant and have a baby, and so we should not consider her for this job or promotion. Would you say that about John? Probably not. So that's one way to, like, frame it. Like, even if you're thinking of something through in your head about why somebody is or isn't a fit, just, like, run it through that filter and then call that out if you hear this, your colleagues making, something that just seems like it's gender biased. And then actively support women. And I just say that, make a list of 5 actions that you can do and do them. I want to leave you with some strategies for women. I'm sorry, I'm going quickly so we can have some time for Q&A. Make sure you're prepared. That's learning about bias, what we're doing here today. Depersonalize. If a bias happens to you, when it happens to you, do not take it personally. The person who's exhibiting the bias may not even realize that they are being biased. So give them the benefit of the doubt, but do not take it personally. Make sure you're building your support network inside and outside of your organization. You need people to strategize with and vent to. Take care of yourself, take your vacations, log off of your email at nights and weekends. Just really take care of it, prioritize your own, spend time with your family, that kind of thing. And then last, alternatives. You may find yourself in a situation that really is just untenable. You may find that despite your best efforts, you're in a toxic workplace or a toxic environment that just doesn't look like it's going to change. So don't feel that you have to let one person or one workplace, like, limit your opportunities to success. You may need to look at your alternatives, go somewhere else. Even it could be somewhere else in your own organization. It could be outside of your organization. It could be working for yourself. Just know that you have to attend to you. That as women, we can't be expected to fix this whole problem of workplace gender bias on our own. To make sure that you keep in mind the alternatives that you would have for yourself. And with that, I will open it up to questions. Oh, and I will say that I am available. I have a website and I'm available, like, on all the major social media networks. So please feel free to connect with me. And yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, we'll take just a couple minutes of questions and then a break to set up for our panel. And there'll be plenty of opportunity for more audience questions during the panel discussion, both from our live audience and our Zoom participants. But is it anybody have a burning question that we can pose to think about before we take our break? Newton, you look like you've got something burning.
I wanted to ask a question about almost like a bystander, like where the ally.
Yeah.
And I'm going to use an example that actually I've shared with our president, Dr. Burrow, that previous president, everybody used Dr. So-and-so. And yet with Dr. Rowe, everybody calls Wendy. Now, it may be that she's been
Mhm.
here long, many
Mhm.
people know her, but still, if you remember, I said to you, I said, I'm going to call you Dr. Rowe because that's what you've
Yeah,
earned.
yeah,
And I try to make sure that
Yeah.
I never use her
Mhm.
name in public without using President Rowe or Dr. Rowe.
yeah.
So what should people do when they see this happening again and again and again? And ours is women dominated
Mhm.
institution.
Yeah, I love that because it's just it's like so ubiquitous and so common, unfortunately. And I could go back to like it stems from like women belong at home and men belong at work, and so there's a familiarity that you want to impose on women who've earned a degree that you don't impose on the men. But no, as the bystander, you do want to call it out in the moment or afterwards. And you have to be careful sometimes calling it out publicly, depending on who you are, what your role is, who the other people in the room are. If you do feel comfortable, it is good to, say something like, hey, like, this is Dr. So-and-so, rather than, just to call it out publicly. But it's also good to, can also be effective to pull the person aside, right? And have a conversation, say, hey, I heard you, calling her this. You might want to think about why it's not appropriate, So the whole calling it out thing and it's just so helpful because it's so hard when it's you're the person that it's happening to. It's just can be very challenging for you to be the one to say something. Yeah. Yeah.
So we have a question from Zoom, and the question is, in regards to the gender pay gap, how can you ensure that you are getting equal pay when it is so taboo to discuss salary?
Yeah. So that's a good question. And so pay transparency is, I think, something that I wish that was like just established across the board in the United States. There are some organizations, in particular public organizations, where it's there and you can go and research your coworkers, wages and know what other people are paid. But then there are other organizations that are not under any kind of rules, and they tend to keep that stuff private, and then they keep it private because they don't want people coming to them saying, hey, I'm actually underpaid. Like they don't want to like deal with it. And so, the question is, how do you know? Well, you can certainly, if your place of work doesn't actively prohibit you from talking about your pay, you can like have kind of conversations, with people. The other thing you can do would be like just research and look for online like job postings and things of, jobs that might be comparable to yours. There's a lot of states now that require positions to post job ads to post salary ranges, so that can give you an idea of what your position might be worth. So there's other ways to get at the information even when it's not like part of a public database. Yeah.
Thanks. That was great. Isn't there also some research that shows that women aren't as good as men at asking for a raise, and that they often, I've done that myself.
Mhm.
Previous president promoted me to provost and said, how much do you want? And so I gave a number, which I thought was a great number, and he started hysterically laughing. And he said, no,
Yeah.
you need more than that. I went, oh, I really bombed on that one.
Yeah.
But so I think that women, I've heard, and then I researched and they said, yeah, women often don't ask for what they're worth or what they should be paid.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's true, but it's also that what you just described is that they know and they fear, they're very real fear of getting backlash for asking for too much or for asking. And there again, that's where going in with like, if you're going to ask when you're trying to pull as much data as you can to say, hey, others in this similar type of role are making X, and so this isn't like a ridiculous ask. To have the data that supports the ask can be helpful. But yeah, yep.
Oh, okay. We'll take one more question and then we're going to take a break and let our panel. No. Please.
Thanks for a really interesting talk and presentation. When you talked about some of the biases that you see in the workplace, one of the things that you talked about was taking on more service, that women are more likely to take on more service. And I was surprised in terms of your strategies for women that it didn't talk about like saying no to things, right? Or you gave the example of like bringing cupcakes to the work, sort of calling people in, right? Hey, John, how about you bring cupcakes tomorrow? And so I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that.
I'll say about, of course, I only had a few minutes here, but in the book, at the end of each chapter, we give strategies for each of these barriers and sub barriers for leaders, allies, and individual women. So the things that I didn't, get to, there are solutions in the book, but, you were talking about the strategy of saying no, like, it can be tricky because, like I said, if you say no, you may be in an environment that gives you, like, you're under pressure, social pressure to say yes. But, I do think it is about like to the extent that you can document what you're doing, right? And take that to the person that or the group that's, sort of asking and say, hey, here, I'm doing this committee, this work. Like, how can we share the load, right? Because it isn't so much about us saying no to the work, but it's about the work being equally shared. Or if it's in some cases, it's, either sharing the work with your coworkers or hiring somebody to do it. Like, there's nothing wrong with hiring an actual admin assistant to do, like, take the notes and plan the parties and do all that. And like assign that to somebody who's that's their task, right? I know service work is a little bit different in higher ed, but I think it really is like just keeping track of like what is it that you're doing and having that as a backup to say, we need to talk about what I'm doing and like how can it be more of a shared thing? Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for a fantastic keynote. Let's have a round of applause for Dr. Diehl. And we do have a wonderful panel that's ready to go. So we're just going to take a 3-minute break if you want to grab a glass of water or snack or run to the restroom, but we're going to get started very quickly.
So it's my pleasure to now introduce our other panelists. So Dr. Allison Deminger is an assistant professor of sociology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her research focuses on how and why gender continues to shape individuals' experiences at home and at work, even as support for gender egalitarianism has grown. Dr. Deminger's first book, Thinking Gender, is coming out from Princeton University Press in 2025, so congratulations. In it, she draws on more than 170 interviews with members of both same and different gender couples to illuminate the underappreciated cognitive dimension of household work and reveal how and why this labor is gendered. So I'm really looking forward to reading that one. I think it's going to be fascinating. Dr. Kimberly Derry is a member of RFU's Board of Trustees and president of Elmhurst Hospital. She began her career as a chemist working in the pharmaceutical industry before changing careers and entering Chicago Medical School. After being in private practice, she later became the medical director of obstetrics and gynecology at Elmhurst Hospital. She serves on many boards, including the Elmhurst Hospital Foundation Board, and also serves as the chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council and Health Equity Task Force. Dr. Derry is a native Chicagoan, and I love this that she has this in her bio, a proud, loving mother and wife. She believes in paving the way for others and making a difference in the world by spreading kindness and compassion, and is passionate about mentoring young adults interested in science and medicine. And Danny Pinsera, they, them, is a first-year physician assistant student at our school. Danny is a dedicated advocate for fostering trust between patients and healthcare providers to enhance health outcomes. With years of experience working closely with marginalized communities, including individuals living with HIV and transgender and gender nonconforming patients, Danny has been instrumental in promoting inclusive healthcare practices. Their commitment lies in transforming the medical field into a more inclusive and non-judgmental environment, particularly for transgender, non-binary, and intersex communities who have historically faced and continue to face systemic oppression. So I'm so delighted that we're all here together to talk about these. We're going to take this light off so we're not being blinded. And I should say, by the way, that I'm Susie Calkins and I'm the director of the Nexus for Faculty Success. Okay, so my first question, I'm giving Dr. Diehl a little bit of a break for just a moment here. For Dr. Derry and Dr. Deminger and Danny, please tell us a little bit about your perceptions of how gender has played a role in the workplace and or in healthcare more broadly, and why it matters that we're examining this topic. So would one of you like to begin?
First, I just want to say I'm honored to be here. So thank you so much for having me on this panel. As you heard from my background, definitely had a lot of twists and turns in my career. And one of the things that I think that really stuck out more for me, and it's interesting by also being a woman of color, sometimes you don't know why people treat you the way they do, because there is gender, and then you also have, ethnicity and, where you come from and that kind of thing. So, what I will always say is, and one thing that had always kind of been across the board is we are still in a male-dominated society. Science and medicine are definitely male-dominated. I happen to choose a career in obstetrics, which is more female dominated than male when it comes to that profession. However, when it came to leadership, it was a whole different ballgame. And so to see, women, women field teams, on my units and, in the offices. And then when I tried to go into leadership, it was definitely a little bit of a different scene. And so just recognizing that as much work as we do, there's still a lot more to happen, especially in certain areas in medicine and science where we just don't have that representation. So the best we can do is identify it, figure out how we can strengthen ourselves and our representation, come to the table. One thing that you mentioned in your talk, which I thought was very key to me, is being transparent and being yourself. Authenticity is key, not trying to conform to be someone that you're not. And it's not for us to change, it's for the system to change, right? And to be accommodating and to understand what is needed in a workplace. So those are some of the lessons that I've learned.
Hi, everyone. It's an honor to be here as well. So a lot of my research focuses on what happens at home and how that also impacts what happens at work, right? So Dr. Diehl referred a little bit to these broad gender roles, men in the workplace, going out, being professional, women at home, caregiving. A lot of that has changed, but a lot of that remains the same, right? Women still do a disproportionate share physical, mental, and emotional labor for their partners, for their children, for their extended families. And that has a lot of ramifications for what they can do in their careers, right? How they are often on call, both, maybe with a pager in a hospital, but also at home if you have a sick kid, right? And so I think it's important to think about the interplay between these spheres and the choices that organizations make, right? Things like how much overwork you expect of people, right? What sort of weekend and evening events you have. Those shape the kinds of people who are going to be able to thrive at your organization because caregiving demands are so unequally distributed. But I think when we talk about gender in the workplace, we have to think about this sort of vicious cycle between paid work and unpaid work, and how we're still dealing with a lot of gender bias in both of those spheres.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me on the panel. It's really an honor to be here and kind of represent another perspective, because I'd like to bring in a perspective from other more like non-binary transgender population that is often overlooked, and kind of invite you to see things from that lens. Because oftentimes I kind of, as a non-binary person who's they, them pronouns, I don't know where I fit into the gender binary between man and woman. And so something that I feel is important in healthcare and in the workplace that is different now, as changing over time, is recognizing how people identify, asking their pronouns, finding out what their preferred name is. That could really change how someone presents in the workplace by being seen. So that's what I was going to add to that.
Thank you. Do you want to add on to that, or? Okay. So, one of the things that you touched on a little bit, Dr. Diehl, I was thinking about when we, at the very end, you were talking about sort of the traditional gender roles, and we think about, and how those have been smashed and how we're thinking about what that means to smash them a little bit, or a lot. How, just sort of taking us back a little bit, how traditional gender roles translated to the workplace, when we think about in healthcare, and in any kind of maybe academic environment, since that's what we're in currently, in terms of emotional labor, mentoring, decision making, financial control. You alluded to it a little bit, but I'd be really interested in hearing, how everyone's been thinking about, how has this happened? I mean, we think about internalized and expected roles, how have they contributed to sort of gender segregated professions, and Dr. Elliott had talked about this in another conversation I had with her about dentist versus hygienist, pediatrician versus surgeon, lab PI versus lab manager, so that there's sort of some expected rules that become internalized. How does that happen, or what do we see? How does this make sense?
Yeah. Okay. So like when I think about it, it goes back to that first barrier that I talked about, that male privilege, where in our workplaces, it's not that women aren't allowed into our workplaces in this day and age, but we still overwhelmingly tend to be segregated into the roles that are more thought of as women's work. And I like to think about it, go back to say the 60s, and I'm thinking about when my mother was in college. My mother came from a farm family. They didn't have a lot of money, but she got a scholarship, and because she got a scholarship, she could go to college. And she was the only one in her family to go to college, but she really only had choices of like 3 professions. And it was teaching, nursing, or secretarial. And the college, it was the one in my hometown, it was Shippensburg, the one that I had worked at also. They didn't have nursing, and secretarial, it was a 4-year college. So it was like teaching was like the default. And like that's just what like women did. So my mother went into that program, and she did well, and she went in for her first year of teaching, and she found out that she really didn't like it. Like it really wasn't for her. Shortly thereafter, she had me, and then she had my 2 brothers, and she stayed out of the workforce for about 8 or 9 years, and then went back into the workforce. She went back in as clerical support, like clerical staff, clerical support. She ended up working her way up to like a professional managerial role, which she, retired from. But I just think about how like back then, like when women started to be allowed into the more professional roles, it was the roles that emulated the roles at home, right? It wasn't like, okay, women, you can now become the physicians or the leaders of the organizations. And so what we see today is like, even though there are more opportunities, like when I went to school, like it wasn't like a weird thing for me to choose computer science, even though it was male dominated. It was like, it wasn't, an open choice for me, and I chose it, but it was still like, we even though these roles are more open to women, what we're finding is that it's what I just talked about. Like when we're in the roles, we're still assigned the female typed work, the emotional labor, the office housework, the caring and nurturing, as opposed to being expected to have the time to do the direct patient work, the sales work, whatever the work is of, the work that might be considered the hard work, even though it's all important. And it's all comes down to like, we're typing, like we talk about the gender roles, we're typing roles as male or female, we're coding them that way. We just need to stop coding them that way so that anybody of any gender, can do them, and that they're all have value. So that's the way I see it from us.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I just wanted to share stories that can pertain to that. Just going into medical school, I had a lot of friends, colleagues of mine who, female colleagues who didn't choose surgical fields because they knew that they would be challenged in the way that they were perceived. And I had a number of friends who did go into surgical fields and how they were treated, or even cardiology, for instance. And it was like, oh, I hope you're not going to try to have babies while you're on this residency, or, and a lot of women, unfortunately, delay their childbearing till they're done. And now they're in their 30s, and, things change for their lives, or they delay getting married because they think that they're going to be judged or treated differently. A real close friend of mine, who is a colorectal surgeon, she was pregnant during her residency, and I think it was during her fellowship, and she got very minor cases. They wouldn't give her the tough cases because they judged her that, oh, you're not going to be able to stand long, or, I think your ankles get swollen during the case. And so she was cheated out of training just because of who she was. And even though when she went on maternity leave, her husband did too, and he was a physician as well, but no one judged him, right? And so I know that those are some of the things that end up happening, and women shy away from a lot of, to be honest, better higher paying positions because they shy away from because they feel they're going to be judged or not given the same opportunities. Who wants to feel they're ill trained coming out, or they end up having to do an extra year fellowship because they feel they weren't trained enough, because they were discriminated against during their residencies if they decided to start families and or get married. And so those are some of the stories that I know happen, and it's a shame because they've gotten this far, and sometimes people walk away from their dreams because they feel that they're going to get judged or not get the training that they deserve.
I totally agree with what you both said, and I want to also offer an additional perspective. So I think that we often tell women to aim higher, aspire. You can be in the leadership roles, but I think at the same time we also want to be thinking about broader societal values, right? The care work, right? The service work that mostly is these days done by women is incredibly valuable, right? Our society cannot function without it. These are the sorts of things that AI cannot take over, at least not for a while. And so I think we also need to think about where are we putting the sort of currency behind, right? And part of it, yes, is encouraging women to become physicians, take on those leadership roles. And I think there's also some social change that needs to happen where we start to say, well, hey, right, the work that you're doing, one-on-one with someone in need, right, we should value that, right? Not just with our words, but also with things like money, which is the currency in our capitalist society.
Maybe Danny, I can ask you a question. We've talked about how the gender binary in itself might be a bias, or is a bias. How does this relate to your commitment of promoting inclusive healthcare practices, particularly for transgender, non-binary, and intersex communities?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah. So I'm of course not an expert, but just talking about my own lived experience. And I know I wouldn't be here today without the people that supported me and encouraged me to be myself and aspire to continue to move up in different roles. And the way that was brought about was by people encouraging me to express myself. So that's, for me, that's my pronouns, my name, and they would ask me those questions. And I see that as something to bring to whether it's the workforce or in healthcare, speaking to any of the current students here that are going to be future providers, that you want to make people feel seen and acknowledge their identities. And so by asking their pronouns or their name and referring to that, people are going to open up more as patients. If they're colleagues of yours, by acknowledging that, they're going to show up better to work, I think. They're going to put more effort in and believe in themselves more by being acknowledged who they are.
Thank you. And maybe I have a question, or I do have a question for Dr. Derry. You've been a leader in healthcare for much of your career, and you currently serve as the president of Elmhurst Hospital. How have gendered assumptions and/or biases shaped your own experiences as a leader over time?
Well, I would have to say that I happen to be extremely fortunate. The legacy at my hospital and our sister hospital at the time had 15 years of women leaders. And so I kind of grew up in that environment, which is very unusual in hospital administration. So my predecessor, her predecessor were both female. And then our system president was also a female. So we and most of our VPs were women. Many of them were nurses who kind of moved up in the operations, hospital operations, and really knew their business like the back of their hand. What's interesting, though, we have recently merged into a larger system now where it was more male dominated. So we're all kind of coming together as this great big old blended family, and which is interesting because many of us come from an environment where women are doing it all, and then we have more of a male dominate. So they're learning a lot from us, which is great, right? And as I mentioned earlier, I look at it as not conforming, but having people see what's good about it. And then they make the change, right? And so instead of all of us saying, oh my gosh, maybe we need to get some more male, leaders around here because this is starting to look kind of weird. But the reality is, what's weird? It's not weird, right? It is our reality. And so the more that we normalize that and let people know that it's all about the work that you do and, the qualifications that you have. Interestingly, it was funny when I was approached to take the president role, and I asked my predecessor, I'm like, you sure we shouldn't balance this out with a guy, because we had this will be like the third female president, in like 15 years, and she looked at me like I was nuts, like, what are you talking about? You're the best person for the job. I don't care, if it happened to be a guy, it would be a man, but if it's not, it's not, and you're not that, you're a woman and you're the right person for the job. And so I appreciate that. And when I think about all these different roles that we feel like we have to squeeze ourselves into weird boxes, we shouldn't. Okay. And being ourselves. And if that industry or if that job or that organization is not ready, then they're just not ready. It just means they're not ready. Right. And so I look at it that we are here to be ourselves, to be authentic, to be transparent. And we just have to let everybody else kind of catch up.
It just shows how deeply entrenched these, I mean, that was your first thought, was like, oh, maybe this isn't, maybe I should balance this out. And but that, I mean, it really shows just, I mean, I don't think I mentioned this, but I'm a historian of gender and women's history. That's my background. And to me, how deeply entrenched these ideas and assumptions and biases, while they change in context and they change across regions, there's something still about how deeply in the culture they tend to be unless we confront them and say, hey, maybe we need to look at this assumption and why did I have this assumption and where did that come from? Dr. Diehl, do you have a thought about that?
Yeah. So I think that's the one thing that coming to events like this can help, the more that we can open our own eyes into the ways that gender and other identity type, biases impact the way that we look at the world. It's just so important. That's the reason that I'm doing this work in relation to gender is, and it's the thing that's the most fascinating to me, because it's when I came into the workplace as a 21-year-old or 20-year-old or however old I was, I thought it was just this neutral place. The opportunities were the same for me as they were for my male counterparts. That the way that the workplace was designed, both in the function and the processes and the people, was again neutral, gender neutral certainly, but it's not. And so that's what this is the most and this is the thing that got me really interested in the research, because it's what is there that is under the coverage behind, that we can't see, but it's there and it's real. And some of it is, like I said, I went into the workplace thinking it was gender equal, and clearly it is not. We all have biases, and just recognizing that and learning as much as we can, so that then we can confront our own biases, and then, call it out in others, help attend to their education too.
Mm-hmm. And do you want to get?
Yeah.
I do want to just share one quick thing that I forgot to mention. When we started, I have a 9-hospital system that we just merged 2 years ago. They had one female president, the rest were all male, with a number of retirements. Every retired president was replaced by a female in the new system. And so it's just funny how, once again, you just kind of breathe life into new situations. And I just wanted to share that just to kind of, close the loop, that for sure it did have an impression, and they picked the right people. It wasn't because they happened to be female. They just happened to be female. It wasn't because they wanted to fix the scale.
I was curious, Dr. Demger, about your forthcoming book. So you have a book, as we mentioned, coming out, Thinking Gender, which explores the gendered aspects of household work with same and different gendered couples. I'm really interested in what you learned. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how those gendered assumptions and biases might be different from what we see in the work world, or even if you know it in the healthcare world, but at least in the professional world?
Sure. As I think Dr. Diehl knows, it's hard to summarize a whole book in, 40 minutes, let alone 2 minutes, but I'll try. So my focus in my research, I interviewed a whole bunch, about 90 something couples. All of them were parents of children ages 0 to 14. And what I was really interested in was looking beyond the typical things we think of as chores and childcare, right? We're probably very familiar with, cooking, cleaning, shopping, but I wanted to know, well, who is figuring out what to eat for dinner, right? Who decides what we're going to have? Who remembers that, oh, we're low on this key item, right? We're out of yogurt and my child is only eating yogurt. We're going to have a meltdown, right? Who says, oh, summer vacation is coming up, right? Our regular childcare is ending. We need to figure out who's coming in. So I had this sense that there's a lot occupying parents' minds, right? That if we just looked at what they were doing, we just measured how they were using their time, that we were going to be missing a lot of that work. So I went in, did these interviews to try and understand what was that mental work. And so I have this whole framework, right, of anticipating needs, identifying options for meeting those needs, deciding among them, and then monitoring the results. This is what I call mental work or cognitive work. And I was interested in how this work was distributed in households. So I started out doing research on different gender couples. And, I bet if I polled you, you could guess what I found, right? In different gender couples, it was women who were bearing a disproportionate share of this work. And that was true even in cases where both partners were really bought into the idea that we want to be an equal partnership, right? Many of them were doing a pretty good job of sharing the physical work. But in a lot of these households, right, the mental work was still much more heavily on female partner shoulders. Later, I expanded the study to include different or same gender and queer couples. And I found that there were often inequalities, but it was usually a smaller magnitude, right? The gaps were a little bit less sharp, right? Rather than 80-20, it was maybe 60-40. And the other big difference was that while different gender couples would often sort of seem surprised when we were talking in the interview that they had fallen into these dynamics, oh, this wasn't what we intended. Same gender couples often displayed a lot more sort of introspection. They would say, oh, yeah, we've talked about this dynamic, right? We kind of know that my wife, she does this and I do this, and, it's okay for us now. Whereas different gender couples, they seem to fall into it. And when I asked them to sort of explain, why do you think you do things this way? The number one thing I heard was that it's our personalities. She's just really organized. Yeah. She's type A, and he's go with the flow. He's laid back, he's spontaneous, right? And what I argue in the book is that this is gender essentialism masquerading as personal essentialism. Right? We're sort of putting these gender stereotypes, but saying it's about her or it's about him, right? And this is a way that we are kind of able to talk the talk, right? And say, yeah, we're good. We're a feminist couple. We're an equal partnership because it's just about these individual differences. And so I think that, we want to be careful as we start to move toward these different beliefs that we're not sort of subtly sticking to the old ways and just calling them something different.
I have to laugh because my husband over here, Matt, he does all of the cooking and all of the shopping. And when our kids were little, he used to do all of the going to the schools and helping with lunches. And they would say, oh, good job. I'm being such a good, caregiver or, whatever. So I always think it's kind of funny. We're the N of one, the opposite way, I guess. But I'm curious about, one of the things that Dr. Diehl had mentioned at the sort of the end is sort of about some strategies and some hopeful things that we can think about as allies, and how we can build awareness and change. And Dr. Diehl in her book and in her presentation had talked about strategies for leaders at the leadership level, at the ally level, and then at the self level. I was just curious, and maybe Danny, we can start with you, like how you might think about how we can kind of build out sort of awareness and change, and what are some positive strategies that we can think about?
Yeah, so to bring it more to my wheelhouse of the more gender expansive community, I've seen it with prior employers, and then also here at the school where I have people in higher positions than myself that put their pronouns in their signatures on emails, introduce themselves after their name, use their pronouns at every meeting, whether there's one new person there that doesn't know them or a room full of strangers. That way it makes it a little bit seem more the usual, the norm, to introduce yourself with your name and pronoun. And it might seem silly to some people or like a really simple ask, and it is, but it can make a big difference to people who on outward appearances, you may not know what pronouns they use or what name they go by. And so just to make it more of a typical thing, introductions to say your name, your pronoun, it makes it easier for everyone else to share their name and pronoun as well. And that can make a huge difference and impact, whether it's the workforce, your employees, or your student body.
And also recognizing if someone is maybe misgendering as well, right?
Yeah, and that brings that up too of, if someone is unaware of, they might be unknowingly misgendering someone. And then this way you're bringing it to people, the forefront of people's minds, and bringing awareness to it.
Okay. Other thoughts about sort of strategies at the leadership level, the ally level, or the self level?
Not quite sure which level this falls at, but maybe all three.
Yeah.
So one of the things I like about my field, which is sociology, is that we are trained to think in systems, right? We think about the ways that individuals are part of families, who are part of, schools and businesses, and make up a broader culture. And so I think when we're addressing these biases, these barriers, it's important to think systematically, right? That we are all have been, raised from birth. There's even evidence, while you're in utero, some of these things start to happen, right? We've been raised this way. We're steeped in a culture that has taught us a certain set of beliefs, right, and heuristics. And so I find it helpful to remember that when I'm in an argument with my husband, or when I'm mad at a colleague who I think is doing one of the many things that Dr. Diehl cautions against. There is individual malice, right? There is individual prejudice, but I also think it's very helpful to think about the ways that we're embedded in these broader systems, right? And to sort of depersonalize it in a way, and to sort of think about, okay, how can I change in this interaction? How can I think about the sort of cultural messages that I want to contribute to the world? So thinking systematically, I think, is my takeaway here.
Yeah, so like I said, like Susie mentioned in the book, we do talk about these three levels: leaders, allies, and women, individual women, because it does take all of us working together. Like these things, these gender biases are just so embedded into our culture. It's going to take all of us. But, I also think about, to your point about, systemically, like, how can we make the most change the most quickly? And that really is thinking about what are the changes at the top of our political systems, our government, that could make an impact. Like some of it's like how we value caregiving, for example. Like we don't include unpaid caregiving in the GDP, right, calculations. We don't include it for credit for Social Security. We don't offer at the federal level, there's no paid family leave. So like getting these things into place to put more of a value on caregiving, which we know is like supporting, society, I think is really key. As well as thinking about, as we put more value into these things, I think it will bring men along, because as much as we talk about getting women into healthcare, getting women into STEM, getting women into leadership, we also need to think about getting men into like these caregiving type jobs, right? Like the social work jobs, the early childhood education, the elementary education jobs. Like we need men in those roles to the same extent as we need women in the leader and STEM roles, right? So that we can really create a gender equal world, and where where caregiving is no longer the least paid, occupation, the least paid type of work in our society, but it, raises up the value that we all have on it. I think that can go a long way too.
So one thing that I think is critical as we all get into the workforce is, once again, just not conforming. And when I like what you in your book when you talk about allies, because I think that if you don't have a good support system where you are, it's very difficult to try to function and to get things to change. You could be a one-person crusader, but you need, because a lot of times these are systemic issues that happen in different organizations, whether it's in academia or in private industry. It can be ingrained in the culture there, but it takes allies, it takes people with influence to be able to help get and make change. And so part of that is education. A lot of people don't realize. It's funny, as we interview new graduates that want to join our medical staff, we now have more, men asking, hey, what's your paternity leave policy? They want to know this kind of stuff, right? Because they do want to be way more involved in raising their children. And where's our photographer? Did he leave? He did. Oh my gosh. Just today, he was like, hey, we got to hurry up. I got to pick up my 9-month-old. I love it. I was like, this is great, And so because equal partner, like someone is saying, hey, I'm invested in the household work as well, and the kids. And he actually said his 9-month-old was going to get mad at him if he was late. And I thought that was wonderful. But part of this is having those allies, and because one person can't do it. Now they can start, but you need more allies to kind of help change a system and have them get educated on how to make that change. Because a lot of times people may want to, or an organization may want to, they just don't know how to get there. And so someone has to help them get there. And I know that just seeing even my new hospital system, they got there real quick because they realized that, this is the right thing to do, and they see great positive changes. But you need to have some influence to help make that work. And that way the people that you work around will want to come to the table and be more vibrant in their jobs. They want to feel like, hey, you care about me and you care about my life, because we spend most of our awake hours at work, and with the people that we work with. So you want to work at a place where they fit your values and where they care about the things that you care about, and not just the bottom line, for instance. So it's all important. But I really like the way that was broken down with the allies.
Thank you. I wanted to give our audience, both online and in person, a chance to ask some questions. And I know you've been thinking deeply and fervently, and you're ready. I won't actually call. Oh, yes, see, our dean. Go ahead. Can you grab one of? Yes. Yeah, okay.
Thank you. I wanted to start by thanking the panel and Dr. Diehl for your presentations and this rich discussion, and you, Susie, for leading it. There's a couple of thoughts that came to me as I was listening to you. Going back first, Dr. Derry, to your comment about thinking, okay, there have been 2 women presidents, maybe it's turn for a man, right? So the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg got asked by someone how many women should be on the US Supreme Court. And she said 9. And that took some people aback. And she said, for 200 years, we had 9 men. Nobody thought that was abnormal. So why would it be abnormal to have 9 women? So I think, when you're talking about changing our mind frame, our way of thinking, I think that's really important. Second point I wanted to make was about parental leave. Even the terminology has changed. We started out talking about maternity leave and paternity leave, and then we finally went to parental leave, because it is really parenting. Doesn't matter what the gender of that parent is. So I'm very pleased to share this with you. I had the opportunity to work with a group on requiring parental leave for medical residents. This may come as a surprise to you, and this is not a long time ago, even though I'm an old lady, but this was literally within the last 10 years that the ACGME, the accrediting organization for medical residencies and fellowships, actually came up with a policy that requires every single program to provide parental leave for those trainees. It actually was up to each program to decide. And that came as a shock to people, that including me, who had been in the medical education system. So I think going back to your point about systems and how do we change systems so that that brings about societal change and ultimately a better situation for everybody, I think that's critically important.
Yeah, thank you. Great panel. Now I wanted to follow up with what Dr. Chatterjee said. And that is, when my daughter had baby, she said, I have maternity leave. And I said, this is great. And she said, and Rob has paternity leave, only 2 weeks. So I was there helping out. And 3 days later, Rob went to work. And I said, I thought you had paternity leave. He said, we have it, but it's looked down upon at work. He works for a bank in New York, right? It's looked down upon if we take it. We're looked at as, not supposed to take it. We have it available, but you're really, not doing what you're supposed to do. Another story is my oldest son worked as an engineer for many years, got sort of burnt out. They had kids 40, and he decides to stay home with the kids because she's on a career path where she's, and he kind of felt like he needed some time to. And people say to him, well, aren't you going to work? Like, you're not working? He said, are you kidding? I work harder than I've ever worked. He said, I've got a 2-year-old. They're 2 years apart. I have a 2-year-old and a baby. And I loved your comment. The systems have to change. But even when we change things like paternity leave or, people still don't accept that change in the system. So.
Yeah, maybe it's time that we start requiring men to take their parental leave, and so that it becomes destigmatized, right? Everyone just takes it. Like, if you have a kid, you take it. We need to start thinking about more, again, going back to systemic change, more system changes that can influence the culture.
I see a question? Ah, great. Lots of questions.
Hello. So one thing that's come up quite a bit in some other diversity discussions that I've been so happy to have here at RFU is about gender presentation and about how much that impacts everything. And so especially for either folks who don't necessarily present in a traditional way, or for intersex, or for trans, or for non-binary folks, I kind of want to pick your brains and see, what has been the research, what's been your experience on how that's come in and played a role in how people are treated. I know, at least in my own experience, it's been a very weird fine line to walk, specifically on going, okay, does this patient think I'm a man, or does this patient think I'm a woman? And how assertive can I be? Because sometimes you just have to go, nope, your dog is lovely, but we need to actually talk about what brought you into the clinic. And kind of how is that brought up just in your own careers, in your own lives, and how does that come up in leadership and research as well?
I see your point and what you're talking about, because I can just mention from my own experience of presenting more feminine and then presenting more masculine now, and just how I'm treated and how people interact with me. I haven't had as much experience with working with patients in that way, but just in day-to-day world, you see a difference in how you're treated, whether you're perceived as a man or a woman. When I'm perceived as a man, I would say that it seems like I get more respect. I'm a friend to other men. I get that fist bump that I think there was a picture of it. There's gendered words. I'm called boss. Yeah, like, just think of all the times at work, in a work setting, or just going to the store or something, that someone says those words to me that make me feel like maybe I have more respect to them, or I'm part of their group. And when beforehand, more feminine presenting, I didn't get those words. I didn't hear that. And so there is like a difference in how you're perceived, and how then someone will treat you based off of that. So that's been my experience.
The research I know most about is about how these things show up in households and in families. And what I have heard from some queer interviewees who identify as non-binary or trans is that the mostly cisgender people who they interact with try really hard to put them into a particular box, and I think, to Danny's point, right, that the box that people decide you're in sort of shapes the way that they treat you. And so I've heard this from some of the queer parents that I've interviewed, that, they want to slot me into the mom role. And they make assumptions about, okay, I'm going to be the one, the primary contact. I'm going to be the one that, is on call if the child is sick. And so to me, that speaks to like the power of these categories and the way that they operate in people's minds. And it causes a lot of distress for people who do not want to be put in those categories, who do not feel like they fit along those lines. So I don't know if that helps, but it shows up definitely in the data that I've collected.
Well, no, I just wanted to just mention that there are a lot of health systems, including mine, that we are extremely intentional for patients when they arrive, that we don't make assumptions, and we immediately ask, are there pronouns that you want to be addressed at? What is your preferred name? And just for health reasons, we may ask what gender at birth, just so that we can make sure that we are addressing, proper, body systems, for instance. But we've been very intentional of doing that, because, and we've even gotten to the point where we actually highlight our providers that have specially, that their staff is specially trained for folks that may have, special accommodations and things that they want to talk about, that they may not know if another provider would be comfortable with, or their staff. And so it's really nice to be able to have that extra resource, because as you mentioned, and what I love that we do is asked and answered. Like, once we ask, we don't ask you every time you come, so that we don't have to go through that every time. And I think that that's very important for people to feel that I've answered. And so I don't have to answer again, because you should have that in the information, and therefore you can address me in the way that works and makes me feel comfortable. And so I think that that's something that we've trying to increase our sensitivity in that way, to make people feel that they are welcome, in our doors, and that our staff will, treat them the way that they want to be treated.
So we have a question from online, from an anonymous attendee, saying, how do you confront a superior who makes you and your peers feel inadequate in their job on a regular basis?
See, nobody wants this one. This is a hard one. Because of the power dynamics, right? It is somebody in your hierarchy who is superior to you. And it really requires, thinking about your relationship with that person. How open are they to feedback? Some people are much more open to a conversation that would be like, hey, I wanted to have this conversation with you. This is impacting my ability to get my job done. Certainly framing it in terms about, your work, how it's impacting your work. But you have to know whether or not, like, you have to have a sense, of whether you have safety in doing that. And in some ways to get that sense, if you don't know, based on your own interactions with that person, is try to find other colleagues within your department or within your organization who you can bounce this off of and see, what they would suggest. There's also human resources, but I always have the caveat about human resources. Human resources works for the organization and not for you. And so you need to, I also assess whether you have safety, you know, in talking to human resources. By and far, most of the individuals that work in human resources, they want to do the right thing for the individual, but they're constrained, right? And what I found in my own personal situations is there have been times I've spoken to human resources where I have, you know, explained this is the problem that I'm having. You know, I don't know what to do with it, but what they have told me is they've kind of guided me through of like, even before I, you know, disclose anything to them, this is what I will do with the information. This is what I won't do with it. So I would know if I would have safety in talking to them. So you want to assess your safety, you know, your first before entering that conversation. And it kind of goes back also to my final, you know, on that final slide where I'm like having alternatives and knowing when to use them. If it's your superior and like they are just not open, you know, and the people above them are not open to hearing you, then it may be time to get out. And, you know, I say that like I hate to tell people like, you know, just, you know, walk away, but you know, it's your life, it's your career, you know, don't let somebody like that block your personal success, your happiness, your emotional, you know, stability. Anybody else?
Yeah, I know there's more questions. I just wanted to follow up because in my understanding, women are less likely to seek to switch jobs.
Yeah.
And some of it is constraints,
Yeah.
family, and so on, but that is the best route to advancement. So, yeah. I know there were many more questions. I think we have time for one more, probably.
Okay, thank you. It's very quick. It very much follow-ups. You said alternate, right? If you don't feel comfortable, leave. But then we talk about systemic changes. How will they happen if every time when a woman isn't comfortable, she's like her only way to leave? And you cannot imagine saying, oh, you have to have a good relationship with everybody else around if you're a man to have to have that safety to go to HR and say, actually, I'm not comfortable. So if we want to change the system and we advise to leave, will the system change?
And that's like one of the insidious aspects of the gender bias, right? That's the goal, is like to push us out, like to keep us from advancing and being in you know, leadership and being in control, right? And by and large, unfortunately, it works. You know, and for an individual making a choice, like I can never tell somebody stay in a toxic situation. Like I can't tell them because it's just going to make their situation, their own personal situation, much worse. But in getting out of that, like there are things that we can do, you know, to each in our own little worlds to help make the situation better for ourselves and for others. You know, one of the easy things, we can vote, right? Think about who we're electing into these offices, and are they thinking about the needs of all people? Are they thinking about the needs of women? Are they thinking about the needs of non-binary people whenever they are making their legislation? You know, ask yourself that question when you're at the voting booth, right? You know, other ways, of course, are be supporting, you know, your family, your friend, like making people aware of these issues. So there are things we can do, but your point is very well taken. That, and it's the whole point of gender, like it's the whole point. For women after women after women, get them pushed out so that the control of the power and the control rests in the hands of men. Like that's the whole point, the whole goal. Anybody else?
And all I would say to that is that just means that organization is not ready, right? And so that might be that ticket to say, hey, maybe this is not for me. I shared earlier today, just real quick, my mentor who always said to me, whatever position you're in, whatever organization you're in, if they don't foster your values and you are living outside, or you feel like you have to live outside your values in order to be there, then it might not be the right environment for you. And it's worth it because we spend more awake hours there than you do in your own home. So just something to think about.
Great. Thank you so much. This was a really amazing panel. I just want to thank you to all our panelists and to our audience as well. So, all right. Thank you so much. Have a great day.